Walter Price was 47 years old, and until that night, he believed the woman sitting at his hospital bedside was grieving. He had built his construction firm from a single truck and a borrowed backhoe into a $4.7 million operation. With his own hands, his own blueprint, his own sacrifices, his wife Diana had called him steady, safe, dependable. What she meant, though he didn't know it yet, was dispensable. Walter was lying broken in that hospital bed. Fractured leg, cracked ribs, a truck wreck on Route 9 that the police called an accident. When the room went quiet, and his wife closed the door, she leaned close to the night nurse and whispered words that Walter would spend the rest of his life wishing he had never needed to hear. Let him die. It would be a mercy. Then came the sound of an envelope changing hands. Walter didn't move. He didn't make a sound. He controlled his breathing and stared at a ceiling he couldn't fully see. And in that stillness, something in him that Diana had spent 16 years underestimating quietly locked into place. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The truck smelled like dirt and diesel and honest work. Walter Price drove with one hand on the wheel. The windows cracked 2 inches because he liked the air even when it was cold. Route 9 stretched out ahead of him, a long, quiet ribbon of road that cut through the edge of town before dropping into the residential neighborhoods below. He had driven this road so many times he could feel the curves before they came. It was 6:14 p.m. The job site on Mercer had gone long. A concrete pour that needed babysitting. Then a drainage alignment issue that one of his younger guys had flagged too late in the afternoon. Walter had stayed until it was right. He always stayed until it was right. That was not a policy at Price & Sons Civil. It was just the way Walter Price operated, had always operated, since the first job he ever ran with a borrowed backhoe and a 2-man crew and more debt than sense. 21 years later, he employed 22 people, had a second truck, had a corner office with his name on the door. Not a fancy office, but a real one. He had built all of it from a community college degree and a refusal to quit that had been mistaken, by almost every person who did not know him well, for a lack of ambition. He let them think what they wanted. He turned the radio down as the site faded behind him and let himself have the quiet. These 20 minutes between the job and the house were his. Nobody needed anything from him. The radio was a country station playing something too loud and too cheerful, and he clicked it off and listened to the tires instead. He thought about the Mercer drainage fix. He thought about the soil composition in the back section of the lot. Too much clay, something to flag before the next rain. He thought about his foreman, Marcus, who was sharp and steady and probably ready for more responsibility than Walter had given him yet. He did not think about home right away. He let himself arrive there slowly. Diana had made dinner the previous night. Chicken, rice, the good kind of hot sauce he kept on the second shelf. She had set the table and poured wine, and sat across from him with that particular expression she wore in the evenings, polished, slightly distant, like a woman sitting in a waiting room that happened to have a nice tablecloth. Walter had learned, somewhere in the last few years, not to name that expression out loud. She was beautiful in the way of a woman who worked at it. Tailored blouses, natural hair that she kept in careful order, a laugh that landed exactly where she aimed it. She had a gift for rooms. She could walk into any gathering and come out knowing exactly who mattered and who didn't. He had admired that about her once. These days it mostly made him feel like a room she had already mapped. "You smell like a job site," she had said last night, not looking up from her phone. "I was on a job site," he said. She turned her phone over. "How long is the Mercer project?" 4 more weeks, maybe 5. She nodded, the way you nod at information you are storing out of obligation rather than interest. Brendan said there was some contract issue. Walter had paused at that. Not long, just a beat. What contract issue? I don't know. He mentioned it. Said something about the billing setup being complicated. Brendan doesn't handle billing, Walter said. She shrugged. Light and easy. Then I probably misunderstood him. She refilled her own wine and didn't offer to refill his. Brendan had called Walter at lunch that same day, which was not unusual. Calls from Brendan were frequent. He was the kind of man who stayed in contact because contact was how he stayed relevant. What had been slightly unusual was the questions, not about the Mercer job, about Walter's schedule. What time do you usually wrap at that site? Do you always take Route 9 back? You still driving the F-250? Friendly questions, delivered in Brendan's easy, unhurried voice. The voice of a man who had never once been told his questions were too much. Walter had answered them without thinking. Of course he had. Brendan was Diana's little brother. He had been around the firm for 2 years, useful enough in the way that a man who shows up reliably and doesn't cause problems is useful. Walter had brought him on as a favor and kept him on because there had been no reason not to. He filed the questions away without examining them. He had a pour to supervise. He was thinking about the clay soil again when Route 9 tilted downward. The long grade. Half a mile of steady descent that ended at the intersection with Delwood Road. He had driven it 400 times. Easy. He touched the brake pedal to manage his speed. It went soft, not gradually. One moment it was there, the next it was not. A spongy collapse beneath his foot, like pressing down on air. He pumped it. Nothing. He pumped again. The truck was moving faster. He grabbed the emergency brake. It slowed him. Not enough. The intersection was coming. A drainage culvert ran along the right shoulder. He turned into the skid the way you turn into a skid, the way muscle memory said to, and the guardrail caught the passenger side and crumpled, and then there was no more road. The culvert was deep, and the water was cold, and it came in fast through the shattered window. Walter Price sank into it in the dark. He came back to the world in pieces. First came the sound, a steady electronic beeping that seemed to originate from somewhere just behind his skull. Then the light, pale and flat and merciless, pressing down through eyelids that felt swollen and strange. Then the smell, antiseptic and floor cleaner, and something underneath both of those things, something industrial and institutional. The smell of a place that existed for one purpose only. He was in a hospital. He knew this before he could fully see it, before he could inventory his own body or remember the road or the water or the cold. He simply knew it the way you know a room you have woken up in before, not from sight, but from accumulated information, settling into him the way silt settles to the bottom of still water. The beeping was his heart. He understood that next. He tried to move. His left leg sent back a signal that was not quite pain. It was too large for the word pain. It was a full-body announcement. He stopped trying. He catalogued instead. Broken ribs. He could feel that in every breath. A tightness, like a clamp across his chest, that tightened further when he inhaled past a certain depth. His left leg, immobilized and elevated. A dull, constant, enormous pressure. His back, not broken, he didn't think, but wrong in some fundamental way. A stiffness that ran the length of his spine and told him that rolling over was not going to happen any time soon. His throat was raw, sandpaper and swollen. Something had been down it. He lay still and let the inventory complete itself. A nurse had come in at some point. He didn't know when. Time had not yet reassembled itself into sequence, and told him he had been there for 3 days. He had retained that. 3 days. The rest of what she said moved around him without landing. He was alive. That was the structure of it. Everything else was detail. Diana was in the chair by the window. He could not see her clearly. His eyes were still swollen at the edges, and the fluorescent light made everything flat and hard to resolve. But he could hear her, the soft movement when she shifted her weight, the specific quality of her silence, which had its own texture the way Diana's silences always did, calibrated and deliberate. She was on her phone. He kept his face still, his eyes at the careful near shut that looked like sleep and wasn't. This was not something he decided to do. It simply happened. The same instinct he had in contract negotiations, the long-practiced ability to be quieter and stiller and more patient than the room expected. He had always gathered more information by appearing to have none. Over the next several days, he gathered. He watched Diana manage the attending physician with low, warm concern. The right questions asked at the right moments, the hand pressed briefly to her chest when she expressed worry about his progress. He watched her smile at the nurses from the doorway of his room with the grateful, slightly undone warmth of a woman pushed to her limit by love and fear. He watched her hold his hand when the physical therapist came through, and he felt, without expression, the specific practiced quality of that grip. He had felt that grip for 16 years and mistaken it for something else. He filed it all without reaction. He let her believe the medication kept him foggy. He let her believe she was the only fully conscious person in the room. He lay still and he listened. It was 11:52 p.m. on the fifth night. He knew the time because the digital clock on the wall monitor was the one thing his eyes could resolve clearly from the bed. And he had been awake for 2 hours in the dark, lying in the specific stillness of a man with nowhere to be and no reason to announce himself. Diana had been quiet for a long time. He heard her stand when the door opened. The night nurse, a woman he had catalogued over 5 nights, steady, professional, unhurried. She entered for the scheduled vitals check the way she always did, and Walter tracked her footsteps and prepared to perform the slow, shallow breathing of a man fully under. Then he heard it. The door, closing. Not the casual drift shut of a door nudged by a passing body. Deliberate. The soft, considered click of a door someone had chosen to close. At midnight. In a hospital room where the door was always kept at its usual crack for airflow and monitoring. Walter slowed his breathing. Long and even. He felt his heart rate try to climb, and he breathed through it. The same discipline he had learned at 32 on an underwater pressure survey. Chest deep in cold water with equipment that couldn't tell the difference between a controlled breath and a panicked one. Breath was the only thing he could control. He controlled it. Diana's voice dropped to just above nothing. "I've given this a lot of thought," she said. Quiet and smooth and completely rehearsed. Walter never wanted to live diminished. He told me that himself, many times. The way things are going, the intervention is just prolonging it, prolonging his suffering. A pause. The nurse did not speak. "If something turns in the night," Diana's voice stayed soft, stayed warm, stayed utterly controlled. "If his numbers drop, I need you to not call the crash team. Just let it happen." Another pause. Smaller. "Let him die." Her voice did not waver. "It would be a mercy." The room held that sentence. Then the sound of an envelope, the specific papery resistance of something being passed between 2 hands. Diana's voice again, lower still. 3,000 in there. The same again when it's done. No one questions these things. Patients in his condition, it happens. It's no one's fault. The nurse said nothing out loud. The envelope did not come back. The door opened. Footsteps receded. Diana returned to her chair with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had completed a task and now simply needed to wait for its outcome. Walter lay on his back in the dark. His heart rate monitor held steady. The number did not climb. His breathing stayed long and even, each inhale measured to the precise depth that kept the monitor flat. Because the alternative, the spike, the alarm, the nurse rushing back in, was not something he could afford. He stared at the ceiling. He thought about Route 9, the brake pedal going soft, the way it had not been gradual, the way it had been engineered, a word he now applied to it with complete and awful clarity. He thought about Brendan's questions over lunch. What time do you usually wrap? Do you always take Route 9? You still driving the F-250? He thought about the words Diana had just spoken, not through the softening filter of disbelief, as information. As data points in a structure, he was now, for the first time, seeing the full blueprint of. His wife had paid a nurse to let him die. She had said the words plainly, without decoration. Let him die. The same mouth that had said his name in the dark for 16 years. Walter Price lay still. He did not move. He began to think about what needed to be built next. Diana arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning with coffee she did not drink. Walter heard her before he saw her, the particular rhythm of her heels in the corridor, measured and unhurried, the sound of a woman who had decided what this day was going to look like before she left the house. She came through the door with the coffee cup held in both hands, and her face arranged in the expression he had watched her build and maintain for 5 days now. Soft eyes, worry worn lightly, so it read as love rather than burden. She set the cup on the windowsill and came to the bed and took his hand. "Morning," she said. The word came out gentle, intimate, the tone of a woman speaking to someone she was afraid of losing. Walter let his hand stay where it was. He made his face do what it needed to do, the weak, unfocused look of a man still mostly under. He had gotten very good at it. The attending physician came through on rounds at 8:30. Walter watched Diana step forward to meet him, with the specific timing of a woman who had choreographed this moment. The right distance, the right posture, close enough to signal investment, far enough to signal respect for the doctor's authority. "Is the inflammation improving?" she asked. Her voice carried the careful anxiety of a person who had been researching and worrying in equal measure. "I read that with bruising along the cord. The first 2 weeks are the most critical window." The physician answered her, and Walter watched her listen. The small nod, the follow-up question that demonstrated she had processed the first answer, the brief press of her hand to her collarbone when he mentioned the timeline for mobility assessment. Every beat of it was exactly right. He filed it all. He did not move. Yvette Marshall worked the morning handoff. Walter tracked her from the moment she came through the door. She was not the same as she had been on the nights before the 11:52 conversation. Something had changed in the architecture of how she carried herself. A tightness around the jaw, a quality to her eyes that did not match the professional composure of her movements. She checked his IV line, and her hands were not quite steady. Not visibly shaking, nothing that would register to a room that wasn't looking closely. But Walter was looking closely. She did not look at Diana once. Diana spoke to her. Something brief and warm about whether Walter had rested well. Yvette answered in the direction of the monitor, her eyes on the numbers, her voice giving Diana nothing back but the minimum required by the situation. She finished and left the room at the pace of someone who had somewhere else to be. Walter stored this carefully. The hands, the eyes, the specific quality of a person carrying weight they had not yet decided what to do with. He had seen that look on job sites, on men who had made a call they knew was wrong and were waiting to find out whether it was going to matter. It always mattered. He knew what Yvette Marshall was holding. He also knew she had not yet spent $1 of it. Diana's phone buzzed at 9:15. She looked at the screen, and her expression shifted. Something compressed and quickly managed, before she stood and touched Walter's arm. "I'll be right back," she said. "Just need to take this." The door eased shut behind her. Celestine came in 4 minutes later. She was a small woman, 71 years old, built in the compact and durable way of someone who had survived things by not being breakable. She wore her good coat, which meant she had come directly from somewhere that mattered, or had decided this visit was somewhere that mattered. She carried her large black purse on her forearm the way she always had, like a second set of armor. She came to the bed without hurrying and without the performance of distress that most visitors brought through that door. She simply came and stood and looked at him with the clear, steady eyes of a woman who had been watching him since he was 7 years old, and did not require any preamble. Walter spoke. His voice was barely above breath, roughed down by the intubation to something that barely qualified as sound, but it was direct. His eyes were the clearest thing in his face. "Auntie," he paused for one breath. "I need a phone. Not mine. Diana's got mine. Prepaid. Keep it in your purse." Another breath. "Call Philip. Don't say anything except that there is a structure problem. He'll understand. He'll come." Celestine looked at him. 2 full seconds. Her face did not shift into alarm or question. She looked at him the way she had always looked at him when the situation was serious, and he was handling it seriously, and there was nothing she needed to add to that. She put her hand over his, patted it once, slowly. The same gesture from when he was a boy, when the answer was yes and no further words were needed on either side. Diana came back through the door at 9:20 with her phone in her hand and her expression fully reinstated. She settled into the chair beside the bed and reached for Walter's hand again, and began to tell him, softly and with great care, that the doctors remained cautiously hopeful. Walter let her hold his hand. He watched her the way he watched blueprints now, not for what they showed, but for what they revealed about the person who drew them. The specific calibration of her voice, depending on whether a nurse was in the doorway. The way her thumb moved across the back of his hand in the automatic, practiced motion of affection long since converted to reflex. The complete absence of anything uncontrolled in her face. 16 years. And he was only now seeing the full blueprint. Something cold and precise settled in the center of his chest. Not rage, not grief. Something quieter than either. The focused stillness of a man who has identified the failure point in a structure and is already calculating, without hurry, exactly what it will take to bring it down correctly. He let her hold his hand. He watched her. He waited. Philip Okafor arrived at 11 o'clock with a leather briefcase and the calm, unhurried manner of a man making a routine call. He wore a dark gray suit. No tie, a deliberate choice that read as professional but not ceremonial, which was exactly the register a routine hospital visit required. He signed in at the nurse's station, stated his business without elaboration, and came through the door with the particular ease of someone who had never once in his professional life allowed a room to read anything from him that he had not already decided to put there. Diana was in the chair by the window. She looked up when Philip entered, and her face made the small, warm adjustment it always made for people she considered useful to manage. "Philip," she said, "I'm so glad you came." "Diana." He shook her hand once, firm, brief. "I'm sorry for the circumstances. I wanted to come sooner." He set the briefcase on the small table near the wall and turned to Walter. "How are you feeling?" Walter made his face do the work. Tired. Grateful. The look of a man glad to see his attorney and glad it was about nothing more than paperwork. "Better," he said. The roughness in his voice handled the rest. He sounded like a man for whom better was still a long way from good. Philip settled into the chair across from Diana and opened the briefcase and began, in his measured and professional way, to walk through the items that justified the visit. Powers of attorney for the firm's active contracts. Insurance claim documentation for the truck. Business continuity provisions for Price and Sons Civil, while Walter remained in recovery. He explained each item clearly, answered Diana's questions without impatience, and gave her no reason to look for any seam in the visit. She didn't find one. At 12:45, she stood and said she was going to get lunch from the place down the block, the one with the soup Walter used to like. She looked at Philip and said she would be back in 30 minutes, and she looked at Walter and squeezed his hand and said she wouldn't be long. The door closed behind her. Neither man moved for 5 seconds. Then Walter turned his head toward Philip and began to speak. He did not stop. He gave it all in one low, continuous delivery. No hesitation, no emotion that rose above the level of controlled precision. The closed door at 11:52. The way Diana had eased it shut rather than leaving it at its usual crack. The texture of the whisper that followed. He recounted what Diana had said to Yvette word for word, including the specific setup. Walter wouldn't want to live diminished. The aggressive intervention is prolonging his suffering. And then the instruction itself, delivered to a night nurse in a darkened hospital room while her husband lay 3 feet away. Let him die. It would be a mercy. He described the sound of the envelope, the amount. $3,000 now. 3,000 more upon completion. Diana's voice threw out, quiet, certain, and entirely without hesitation. Philip listened to all of it, without interrupting. His pen was in his hand, and he made no notes until Walter finished. Then he tore a sheet from the legal pad, wrote 3 words, and slid it across the bed. Document. Prove. Wait. Walter read it, looked up, nodded once. Philip pulled the legal pad back and set his pen down and looked at Walter steadily. Before you called me, he said, I had already moved. He said it the way he always said the things that mattered, without drama, as a simple statement of what had occurred. I know how you think. When Celestine called, I reached out to the towing company before the insurance adjuster had been scheduled. I asked for access to the wreck under insurance review cover. They had no reason to refuse. Walter was still. I brought in a private automotive forensic specialist, Philip continued. He examined the brake system before anyone else touched it. He paused. The brake line was not defective, Walter. It was cut. A slow weep incision in the rear left line, small enough that the brakes functioned normally for ordinary in-town driving, precise enough to fail under sustained heavy braking pressure, the kind of pressure Route 9's downhill grade produces over a long descent. He spoke each sentence flat and clean, the way you describe a fact that does not require decoration to be devastating. The specialist's conclusion is that it was deliberate, targeted, and executed with enough knowledge to make the failure appear incidental. He is prepared to submit a formal written report and testify under oath to all of it. The room held the weight of that. Walter looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at Philip. Who had access to the truck, he said. Documented access, in the 10 days before the crash. Philip's expression did not change. Brendan borrowed it 9 days prior. You assigned him to oversee equipment movement on the Delaware Basin site. He had the truck for a half day. It's in the firm's log. Walter said nothing for a long moment. The half day. The equipment. A job Walter had handed him himself. Out of trust. Out of the uncomplicated belief that family was family, and a man with a seat at your table was a man on your side. He looked at Philip. I want every financial record Brendan ever touched. 11 days passed. Walter measured them the way he measured everything, not by how they felt, but by what they contained. The physical therapist came every morning at 9. His ribs still caught when he breathed too deep. The left leg was a slow, dull argument that never fully stopped. But the swelling in his face had come down enough that his eyes were fully open now, and he used them carefully, the way a man uses a tool he has learned not to waste. Diana came every day. She was very good. He watched her the way you watch a structure that looks sound from the street, not accepting the surface, looking for the load points, the places where the stress was actually being absorbed. She brought things, a better pillow, a book he hadn't asked for, Coffee she held in both hands when she offered it, the warmth of the gesture precisely calibrated. She spoke to the nurses with the warm familiarity of someone who had been here long enough to belong, and the nurses responded to it because she was performing it for them, and they had no reason not to. Celestine came every day too. She did not perform anything. She arrived, she sat, she watched Diana with the patient, settled attention of a woman who had reached an age where she no longer needed to explain herself to anyone. She brought Walter things he actually needed. The phone, charged and wrapped in a handkerchief, transferred to him during the moments when Diana's back was turned. They did not discuss it. They had developed, over 11 days, a system of small silences that communicated more than most people managed with full sentences. On the 12th day, Celestine mentioned to Diana, in the casual way of an older woman making conversation, that there was a new spa over on Clement Street that one of her church friends had recommended highly. Said it was the kind of place that did the deep tissue work. Said Diana looked like she could use a few hours of being taken care of, after everything she was carrying. Diana said that was a lovely idea. She was gone by 10:30 the following morning. Appointment confirmed. 2 hours minimum. Philip arrived at 11. He was not alone this time. He came with a woman Walter did not recognize. Compact, 50s, natural hair cut close, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She carried a laptop and an accordion folder thick with printed documents. Philip introduced her as Renata Cole, forensic accountant, and said nothing further about her credentials because her credentials were evident in the way she sat up at the small table and opened the folder with the brisk, organized energy of someone who had done this particular work many times and intended to do it efficiently. Celestine sat in the chair by the window. She had brought her knitting, but it stayed in her lap, untouched. Renata opened her laptop, turned it to face Walter, and began. 14 months, 41 transfers. Each one executed inside Price & Sons Civil's operational accounts by a user with full administrative access. Access Walter had extended himself, without restriction, because Brendan was family, and family didn't require a short leash. The transfers were not sloppy. Renata walked through the methodology with the flat precision of someone who respected the technical fact of what had been done, even while documenting that it was criminal. Amounts capped at $17,800 apiece, below the threshold that would have automatically flagged a compliance review. Each transfer anchored to a vendor invoice that Brendan created, approved, and filed himself, using 3 fabricated company names that existed only on paper. The invoices were clean. The paperwork was clean. Someone had thought about how audits worked and then built the fraud around the gaps. The total was $387,000. Walter looked at the number on the screen for a moment, without speaking. Renata continued. The money flowed to 3 LLCs. The first 2 were shells, registered to names that did not correspond to real persons, structured to receive and move funds and then dissolve quietly. The third LLC was different. She produced a document from the accordion folder and set it on the bed in front of Walter. It was a registration filing. He read it. The third LLC listed a secondary member. The name was Diana Holloway Price. Walter set the document down. Philip placed a second document beside it. A property deed. He did not editorialize. He simply put it where Walter could read it. The house had been purchased 11 months ago, paid for entirely with funds traced back to Price & Sons Civil accounts, routed through the LLC. It was listed in Diana's maiden name and Brendan's LLC jointly. The address was in another city, 2 hours from where Walter had been building a company for 20 years. According to the utility accounts Philip's investigator had located, the accounts were opened in Diana's maiden name. The house was furnished. It was not a backup plan. It was not an escape hatch. It was a finished life, ready to move into, waiting only for one thing to be resolved. Walter looked at the deed for a long time. Then he looked at Celestine. "Auntie," he said, "can you give me a few minutes?" She didn't ask. She gathered her knitting and stood and walked out, and the door closed behind her with a soft and final click. The room was quiet. The monitors beeped. Outside the window, the ordinary sounds of a parking lot going about its ordinary business drifted up from 3 floors below. Walter sat with it. 3 minutes, maybe a little more. Philip did not speak, and did not move, and did not look at Walter in any way that required Walter to manage how he was being seen. He simply waited, the way you wait for a man to do work that cannot be done faster than it takes. Then Walter looked up. "We need to talk about the nurse." Yvette Marshall had not slept more than 3 hours at a stretch since the night Diana Price pressed that envelope into her hands. She told herself she hadn't done anything yet. That was what she held on to. Taking the money and following through were 2 different things, separated by a line she had not yet crossed. She was still on the right side of it. She still had a choice. The envelope was in a shoebox on the floor of her closet, behind her winter boots, sealed exactly as Diana had given it to her. She had not deposited it, had not spent $1. She had opened it twice in the dark, counted the bills with hands that didn't feel like her own, and put it back. Both times she had stood in her closet for a long time afterward, not moving, not thinking about anything clearly. She had been a nurse for 15 years. She had held the hands of dying people and the hands of people fighting not to die, and she had always, without exception, known which side she was on. That had been the one clear thing. Now it wasn't. She worked her shifts. She checked her patients. She documented her vitals with the careful precision she had built her entire professional identity on. When she had occasion to enter Walter Price's room, she moved efficiently. Eyes on the IV line or the monitor or the chart, never on his face, never on his hands, never on any part of him that would remind her too completely that he was a person and not a problem she was being paid to stop managing. It was on the 9th night that his oxygen saturation dropped. No warning. A legitimate complication. Fluid in the lower left lobe that the day team had not caught on the afternoon assessment. The monitor alarm went off at 2:17 a.m., a steady, insistent sound that pulled Yvette off the nursing station and down the hall before she had fully processed what she was doing. She reached his door first. She stood there for 4 seconds. 4 full seconds that she would carry in her body for the rest of her life. She could see him through the narrow window in the door, his chest laboring, his head turned to the side, his right hand gripping the bed rail with the automatic, desperate grip of a man whose body was fighting without his permission. The monitor alarm continued. No one else had reached the floor yet. She heard Diana Price's voice as clearly as if the woman were standing behind her. Let him die. It would be a mercy. She tested those words against what she could see through the window. A man, not a mercy. A man with his hand around a bed rail, holding on. She pushed through the door and hit the call button on the wall panel. "I need the crash team to room 14, she said into the intercom. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. Oxygen sat in the low 80s, suspected fluid accumulation. Patient is responsive. The team arrived in 2 minutes. Yvette assisted, directed, documented. She was professional in the way that professional becomes automatic, a layer of function running over a layer of crisis that she did not have the space to look at yet. Afterward, when they had stabilized him and the team had cleared out and the floor had gone quiet again, Yvette walked to the far end of the hallway and put her back against the wall and slid down until she was sitting on the floor with her knees up and her face in her hands. She shook for 11 minutes. She knew it was 11 minutes because she watched the hallway clock the entire time. 3 days later, a request came through the floor administrator. Patient in room 14 was asking for a private care conversation with Nurse Marshall at her earliest availability. It was a standard request. Patients made them. She considered calling in sick. She considered requesting a reassignment to another floor. She stood at the nursing station for 90 seconds and did neither of those things, because the line she had been telling herself she hadn't crossed suddenly felt a great deal thinner than it had before. She knocked once and went in. Walter Price was propped up in the bed. The swelling in his face had come down. His eyes were clear and direct, and entirely, uncomfortably present. She had forgotten how present he could look. She stood near the door. He did not rush her. He waited until she met his eyes, and then he spoke in a voice that was low and even, and careful in the way of a man who had chosen every word before she entered the room. "I heard everything she said to you that night," he said. "I heard the door close. I heard the envelope. I know what she told you to do." He paused. "And I know that 2 nights ago you called the crash team when you didn't have to." Yvette's composure lasted about 4 seconds. Then it came apart. Not loudly, quietly, which was somehow worse. A collapse that had been holding itself together by sheer pressure for 9 days. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. Walter let her. He did not look away, and he did not offer her false comfort, because this was not a moment for false comfort, and he knew that, and she knew that, and the room knew that. When she stopped, he spoke again. "I'm not here to take everything from you," he said. "But I need you to understand clearly what she used you for, and what you almost did." He held her gaze. "I need you to decide right now, in this room, whether you are going to be a piece of her plan or a piece of mine." He told her what he needed. A written statement, signed and dated. Diana's exact words, in the order she said them, including the instruction not to call the crash team and the phrase, "let him die," documented exactly as it was spoken, the bribe amount, a description of the envelope, and the follow-up call, the one Diana had placed after the crash team intervention to ask, in the warm and reasonable tone of a concerned wife, why Yvette had interfered. He told her the statement would go to law enforcement. He told her that full voluntary cooperation now was the difference between being called as a witness and being charged as a co-conspirator in a murder for hire. He let that land, and did not fill the silence that followed it with anything at all. She came back the following morning, 7:15, before the day shift handoff. She had the bribe envelope in a zip-close bag, still sealed, every dollar still inside, her fingerprints on it, and, she said quietly, Diana's would be too, from when Diana handed it to her. She had a 4-paragraph statement, handwritten, signed, and dated in her precise nursing chart print. It documented the closed door and the whispered setup. It documented Diana's framing. Walter wouldn't want to live diminished, and the instruction that followed it. It documented the exact phrase, "let him die." It documented the promise of a second payment upon completion. And it documented Diana's follow-up call the morning after the crash team intervention, in which she had asked, in a voice Yvette described in the statement as calm and unhurried, why she had not simply let the situation resolve. Yvette set both items on the bed beside Walter's hand. She didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. Walter looked at the envelope for a moment. Then he looked at her, not with warmth, not with cold, but with the level regard of a man who had said what he needed to say, and was now watching someone do the only right thing they had left to do. He picked up the prepaid phone from beneath his blanket and sent a single text to Philip. She came through. Come get it today. The discharge paperwork took 40 minutes. Walter sat in the wheelchair in the hallway outside his room while a patient advocate reviewed the follow-up instructions with Diana, who nodded at all the right moments and asked 2 precise, well-chosen questions that made her sound like a woman who had been paying very close attention for 22 days. She had been, just not to his recovery. The orderly wheeled him through the automatic doors, and the afternoon light hit him full in the face. Real light, not fluorescent, not the pale gray that had come through the hospital window at an angle for 3 weeks. He closed his eyes for a second, let it sit on his skin. Diana's hand came to his shoulder from behind, gentle, steady. "Almost there, baby," she said, and her voice had the particular texture of a woman performing relief so well she might have believed it herself. Walter said nothing. He opened his eyes. He watched the parking lot. The house looked the same. That was the first thing he registered when Diana pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. Same porch. Same front door he had hung himself 12 years ago because the previous one had warped, and he did not see the point of paying someone to do what he could do in an afternoon. Same 2 steps up from the drive, which he navigated slowly with the crutch and Diana's arm and the studied patience of a man focused entirely on not falling. Inside, it still smelled like his house. Wood, and something faintly citrus from the cleaning Diana had done before the discharge. His furniture, his walls. But he saw it differently now. Her cardigan was folded over the back of the armchair in the living room. Her reading glasses sat on the side table. A row of her candles lined the windowsill in the kitchen, 3 of them, grouped by height, the kind of small domestic arrangement that signals permanence. Her umbrella hung on the hook beside his by the front door, where it had always hung, where she had hung it 1,000 times without him registering it as a statement. He registered it now. All of it was furniture in a waiting room. She had been sitting in his house, at his table, sleeping in his bed, burning her candles in his windows, waiting, keeping everything warm and intact and staged for an audience, while a different house, in a different city, filled up with things purchased with his money and arranged for a life that was supposed to start when he stopped. The physical therapist, a compact young man named Davis, arrived at 2 o'clock sharp. Diana was present for the full session, attentive and warm, asking Davis clarifying questions about the PT schedule, nodding at the weight-bearing restrictions, positioning herself near Walter with the quiet competence of a woman managing something important. Davis clearly found her impressive. He addressed several of his instructions to her as much as to Walter, which was the kind of thing people did around Diana without ever quite deciding to. Walter did his exercises. He answered Davis's questions. He was cooperative and slightly tired, which was true, and which also read, he knew, exactly the way he needed it to read. After Davis left, Diana's phone needed charging. She set it on the kitchen counter and picked up Walter's from beside the couch. "Just for a moment," she said. Just to check the time, her charger was upstairs. Walter watched her pick it up. He watched her face when the screen lit. She had it angled slightly away from him, but not far enough, and the preview notification sat at the top of the screen for 2 full seconds before her thumb moved to clear it. 2 words reached him. He caught them the way he caught everything now, quietly, completely, and without reaction. She said. The number the message came from was not saved under any name, just digits. Diana cleared the notification with the ease of a woman who had done something similar before and knew the timing required. She set the phone back down, said something mild about needing to start dinner, and moved toward the kitchen with the unhurried comfort of someone who had just confirmed that everything was fine. Walter waited until she was at the stove. Then he reached under the couch cushion where Celestine had tucked the prepaid phone that morning during her visit, under the cover of straightening the throw blanket and squeezing his hand twice. He typed the number out from memory, sent it to Philip, with 4 words beneath it. Who does this belong to? Philip's reply came back in just under 3 hours. Unregistered. Brendan's secondary. Investigator pulled 214 messages between them, including 2 calls the day before your crash. Will have full image by morning. Walter read it once, deleted the thread, slid the phone back under the cushion. Across town, in the Price & Sons Civil Administrative Office, Brendan Holloway was reviewing a memo about a routine compliance audit that had temporarily restricted his account access. Philip had framed it carefully. Standard procedural language, no alarm, nothing that required a response beyond acknowledgement. Brendan had acknowledged it and gone back to his afternoon. He had grown comfortable again. That was the thing about men who had never truly been held accountable. Comfort returned to them quickly, like water finding its level. That evening, Diana brought Walter his medication on a small tray. 2 pills, a glass of water, arranged with the care of someone who wanted the gesture noticed. She sat beside him on the couch. After a moment, she rested her head lightly on his shoulder. "I'm so grateful," she said quietly. "I keep thinking about how close it was, and then I look at you sitting here, and I just—" She exhaled. "I'm grateful." Walter placed his hand on hers. The weight of it was correct. The angle was right. The warmth was precisely calibrated. Not too much, not too little. The specific emotional temperature of a man who suspects nothing and feels only the ordinary gratitude of someone who has survived something close. He had been practicing this for 3 weeks. He said nothing. Diana left at 9:15, keys in hand, the particular energy of a woman with somewhere to be moving through the house ahead of her. She told Walter she'd be back by 11:30. She told him his lunch was in the refrigerator, the container on the left, not the right. She kissed him once on the forehead, soft and practiced, and then the front door pulled shut behind her, and the house was quiet. Walter sat with the quiet for 30 seconds. Then he picked up the prepaid phone and sent Philip one word: clear. Philip arrived at 10. He carried a leather briefcase Walter had seen 100 times, worn at the corners, nothing about it that announced what was inside. He came in without ceremony, set the briefcase on the desk in Walter's home office, and opened it with the same unhurried efficiency he brought to every task Walter had ever watched him perform. He did not ask how Walter was feeling. He knew how Walter was feeling. That was not why either of them was in this room. He began laying folders across the desk in a specific order, left to right, each one labeled in Philip's small, exact handwriting. Walter watched the desk fill up and said nothing. When the last folder was down, Philip stepped back and stood with his hands at his sides. "Take your time," Philip said. Walter opened the first folder. The forensic automotive report was 11 pages. Walter read every one. The specialist's language was technical and unambiguous. A slow weep incision, rear left brake line, consistent with a precision cutting instrument, positioned to allow full braking function under standard in-town driving conditions, but engineered to fail under sustained high-pressure application. The kind of failure that would not happen in a parking lot or at a stoplight. The kind of failure that would happen on a long downhill grade, driven at speed. Route 9. Walter had driven that grade 400 times. Whoever made this cut knew that. He set the report down. Opened the next folder. The financial documentation ran to 43 pages. Philip's forensic accountant had rebuilt every transaction from the ground up. Each of the 41 transfers, the fabricated vendor invoices Brendan had created and approved himself, the amounts kept deliberately under the audit flag thresholds, like a man who understood just enough to think he was being careful. 14 months, $387,000. The LLC trail was in the back of the folder, cleanly charted. The first 2 shells dissolved already. Money moved through them and gone. The third one held. The third one listed a secondary member, Diana Holloway Price. Walter looked at his wife's name on that document for a long moment. Her maiden name hyphenated onto his, the name she had used to quietly claim a piece of something built entirely without her. He turned to the property deed. Philip had paper-clipped the listing photos behind it. Walter did not ask for them to be there. Philip had included them because he understood, as he always did, what Walter would need to see. The house was a colonial style in a suburb 2 cities over. Cream siding, black shutters, a front porch with 2 chairs already on it. The interior photos showed furnished rooms, A kitchen with new appliances still wearing their finish. A bedroom with a bed already made, curtains already hung. A home already lived in by the idea of two people who had not yet arrived. Purchased 11 months ago. Funded entirely by Price & Sons civil accounts. Listed jointly under Brendan Holloway's LLC and Diana Holloway Price. Walter set the deed down. His face did not change. Yvette's statement was 4 paragraphs in her own handwriting. Neat, careful letters. The penmanship of a woman who had thought about every word before she wrote it. Walter read it slowly. The closed door. Diana's setup. He would not want to live diminished. The aggressive intervention is prolonging his suffering. The instruction. The exact phrase, 3rd sentence of the 2nd paragraph, documented without softening or euphemism. Let him die. It would be a mercy. The follow-up call. Diana asking Yvette directly why she had interfered. The sealed bribe envelope was in a clear evidence bag behind the statement. Still closed. $3,000 inside it. Undisturbed, with both women's fingerprints on the outside. Walter set it down carefully. Opened the call log summary. 214 communications between Brendan's unregistered phone and Diana's personal cell across 14 months. Philip had flagged the last page. 2 calls the day before the crash. The first, 6 minutes. The second, 11. Walter did not need to know what was said. The timing said everything that needed saying. The civil complaint was fully drafted and ready to file. Both names, every count, the full damages sought. The criminal referral package beside it listed what had already been submitted to the DA's office: conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, criminal vehicular tampering, wire fraud, already submitted, already moving. Philip spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. The prenuptial agreement holds, he said. I had it reviewed by a second attorney, independently. It's fully enforceable. She came into this marriage with nothing. Legally, that is exactly what she exits with. Walter nodded once, slowly. He looked at the desk, at the spread of folders that represented 14 months of his wife and his brother-in-law, and $387,000, and a brake line cut with precision, and a nurse standing at a door in the dark holding $3,000 against a man's life. He closed the last folder. The sound it made was small and final. I want them both in the room, he said. Set it up for Sunday. Walter brought it up over breakfast. He made eggs, something he had not done in weeks. And Diana noticed, the way she noticed everything that could be catalogued and used. He set a plate in front of her and sat down across the table and picked up his fork like a man who had made a decision overnight and was still turning it over. I've been thinking, he said. Diana looked up from her coffee. About Brendan. He cut into the egg. I know things have been tense between us. Before the accident. Before all of it. He set the fork down and looked at her directly, the way he did when he wanted her to understand he was being sincere. Life is short, Diana. I almost didn't come home. I think about that every day, and I don't want to spend whatever time I have left carrying tension with your brother. Diana's expression moved through something, a quick internal calculation that never quite reached her face. Then the warmth came, easy and practiced, the particular softness she produced when she wanted him to feel understood. Walter, she said, that means everything to me. I want him to come to dinner. Sunday. A fresh start. He picked up his fork again. Would you reach out to him? She was already reaching for her phone. Brendan agreed without hesitation. Diana relayed it to Walter that same afternoon. He said he'd love that. He said he misses you. And Walter nodded and said that was good to hear. He did not push. He did not perform gratitude. He simply let it settle. Sunday morning, Diana was in the kitchen when Walter mentioned Celestine. I'd like to have Auntie here too, he said. Casual. The same tone he used when he asked about weather or the grocery list. She's been such a support. I'd like her at the table. Diana's smile did not waver. It almost did. Walter saw the half-second where it had to be recalibrated, but she held it. "Of course," she said. "The more the merrier." He called Celestine from the kitchen phone, in front of Diana, and told her to come hungry. Celestine said she would bring sweet potato pie. Walter said that would be fine. Dinner was almost peaceful. Walter cooked. A real meal, the kind that filled the house with smell and warmth. Roast chicken, rice, string beans the way his mother used to make them. He moved slowly in the kitchen because the legs still required it, and the slowness looked like recovery, which was what he needed it to look like. Brendan arrived at 6 with a bottle of wine and the easy grin of a man who had spent 2 weeks convincing himself the worst was behind him. He shook Walter's hand, firm, genuine, the practiced warmth of someone who had grown up understanding that charm was a tool. He kissed Diana on the cheek. He embraced Celestine with the comfortable familiarity of family, and Celestine received it without stiffening, without giving him anything useful, and said it was good to see him. They sat down to eat. Walter asked Brendan about a job site, a question precise enough to sound like interest without revealing anything. Brendan answered with the looseness of a man on his second glass of wine, shoulders dropped, leaning back in his chair like he owned some of the air in the room. Diana touched Walter's arm once, lightly, during a lull. Twice, later, when Brendan made a joke that landed softly, and the table exhaled into something resembling ease. Celestine said almost nothing. She ate. She watched. That was enough. Walter waited until the table was cleared, until the last plate was in the kitchen and the room had settled into the particular stillness that follows a full meal, the kind of quiet where people let their guards down because the work of the evening feels finished. He waited until Brendan had refilled his glass and leaned back in his chair, until Diana had folded her napkin and set it on the table with the neat finality of a woman who believed the evening was going well. Then he reached beneath his chair. He produced 2 manila envelopes. He set one in front of Diana, one in front of Brendan. Neither had a name on the outside. Neither required one. He sat back and folded his hands on the table and looked at both of them with the calm, unhurried attention of a man who has already finished his work and is simply waiting for others to catch up. "I'd like you both to take a few minutes with those," he said, "before we talk." Brendan looked at the envelope, then at Diana. She did not look back. She opened hers first. Her fingers were steady. Walter had expected that. She had steadier hands than most people he had ever known. She turned to the first page and began reading, and Walter watched the stillness in her face, the way he watched concrete for the first sign of a crack. "I'll walk you through it," Walter said. He began with the money. He named the amount, $387,000, without raising his voice, the way a man reads a figure from an invoice. He named the number of transfers. He named the LLC structures, and the method Brendan used to keep the amounts below the flag thresholds, and the fabricated vendor invoices Brendan had created and signed off on himself. He watched Brendan's jaw tighten, the way a bolt tightens just before it strips. Then Walter named the third LLC. He said Diana's name as it appeared in the registration paperwork. Diana Holloway Price, secondary member. And the room got very quiet. He moved to the house. He read the address aloud. All of it. Street number, street name, city, state. He described the colonial-style exterior and the front porch and the 2 chairs already sitting on it. He described the furnished interior, the kitchen with the new appliances, the bedroom with the bed already made. He said the word jointly when he described the deed, and let it sit there on the table between all 4 of them. Diana's eyes moved to him. He did not stop. He moved to the truck. He described the brake line in the flat, technical language of the forensic report, the slow weep incision, the rear left line, the precision of the cut. the specific engineering of a failure designed not to happen in a parking lot or at a traffic light, but on a long, sustained downhill grade driven at speed. He named Route 9. He named the grade. He named the 9 days between Brendan borrowing the truck and the morning Walter went off the road into the culvert. Brendan did not reach for the glass again. Walter opened the call log summary. He read the number of communications, 214, across 14 months. He read the date of the last 2 calls, the day before the crash, 6 minutes, 11 minutes. He did not speculate about what was said. He did not need to. Then he picked up Yvette's statement. He read it in his own voice, steady, even, unhurried. He read the closed door. He read Diana's setup, the careful framing. He would not want to live diminished. The aggressive intervention is prolonging his suffering. He read through the second paragraph until he reached the 3rd sentence and read it without pause or emphasis, because it did not require either. Let him die. It would be a mercy. He read the follow-up call. Diana asking Yvette directly, after the crash team intervened, why she had interfered. He set the statement down. Diana's mouth opened. Walter. He raised one hand. He did not look away from her. I was awake. His voice was the same temperature it had been for the past 40 minutes. No higher, no lower. I heard every word you said to that woman, and I heard the envelope hit her hand, and I have been lying still for 3 weeks waiting for this moment. Do not tell me what I understand. The room held that. Brendan pushed back from the table and started to stand. Walter looked at him without urgency, without alarm, the way a man looks at something that has already stopped being a threat. The criminal referral was submitted to the DA's office 4 days ago, Philip said from his chair, with the calm of a man reading a weather report. Sit down or stand up. It doesn't change what's already been filed. Brendan sat. Diana stood instead. Her composure was still there. Different now, compressed. The kind of control that comes not from confidence, but from having no other option. She moved toward the hallway, toward the door. She stopped just short of it, and she turned. And she looked at Walter with the last instrument she had left. I'll tell people you were abusive, she said. I'll say whatever I need to say. I'll make sure everyone. The DA has a nurse's signed statement describing a murder-for-hire conversation. Philip's voice was unchanged. A cash bribe in a sealed evidence bag with your fingerprints on it, and a follow-up call you placed, asking why he was still alive. He paused. Say whatever you'd like. Walter crossed to the front door and opened it. The night air came in, cool and quiet. The neighborhood settled into its Sunday stillness. Celestine rose from her chair. She walked toward the door at her own pace, unhurried, the sweet potato pie dish tucked under one arm. She passed Diana in the hallway and stopped. She did not touch her. She looked at her. The long, level look of a woman who had been keeping an accounting for 16 years and was now simply closing the book. I told him, Celestine said. He didn't listen, but he built something strong enough to survive you anyway. She walked past. The door closed. The arrest warrant for Brendan Holloway was executed on a Tuesday morning, 31 days after Sunday dinner. Walter was not there to see it. He did not need to be. He heard about it the way he heard about most things now, through Philip, who called at 7:14 a.m. with the specific brevity of a man who understood that Walter did not require theater. 2 detectives. Brendan's apartment. Hands behind his back in the parking lot of the complex, where he had been renting month to month since Philip's compliance audit had frozen everything else. 3 charges: conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, criminal tampering with a vehicle causing serious bodily harm, wire fraud. Bail was set at $750,000. Every account Brendan could reach was either named in the civil suit or flagged in the fraud investigation. He had nothing liquid. He had nothing hidden that Philip's forensic accountant had not already found and documented. He sat in county jail for 62 days, which Walter did not track on a calendar because Brendan Holloway was no longer something Walter organized his attention around. On the 63rd day, Brendan's attorney negotiated the plea: criminal conspiracy and aggravated vehicular assault. The murder conspiracy count reduced in exchange for full cooperation and sworn testimony against Diana. 7 years. Minimum 4 served. The felony record permanent, following him past every door Walter's firm had once opened for him, closing each one quietly and for good. Walter received that news from Philip the same way he received the first. He was reviewing bid documents for a county drainage project when the call came in. He listened. He thanked Philip. He returned to the bid documents. There was no satisfaction in it that felt like celebration. It felt more like what it was: the final inspection of a structure, confirming every load-bearing point was sound. The work was correct. The math held. That was all. Diana's arrest came 3 weeks after Brendan's. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Criminal solicitation. Yvette's signed statement was the foundation. The sealed bribe envelope, Diana's fingerprints undisturbed on the interior flap, was the wall built on top of it. Brendan's cooperation testimony was the roof. The DA's office had filed with the kind of confidence that comes from evidence assembled by someone who knew what he was doing, which is exactly what Philip was. Diana's attorney filed for dismissal. The judge denied it in less time than it had taken Diana to read through the manila envelope on Sunday night. She accepted a plea to solicitation of criminal homicide and conspiracy. 31 months, 4 years of supervised probation upon release. The civil fraud judgment ran concurrently with the criminal proceeding and resolved separately. $387,000 in restitution, $210,000 in punitive damages, the full amount structured as a lien against every asset she currently held or would hold. She had entered the marriage with nothing. The prenuptial agreement Walter had drawn up at the beginning, the one Diana had signed without protest and privately dismissed as the overcaution of a man who didn't fully trust his own good fortune, confirmed it. She exited with her personal belongings, her car, and a name that now meant something specific and unambiguous to anyone who looked it up. The house Diana and Brendan had purchased, the colonial with the 2 chairs on the front porch and the bed already made, was ordered liquidated by the civil court. It sold in 48 days. After liens and fees, $241,000 came back against the civil judgment. Walter did not visit the property before or after the sale. He had heard the address read aloud once, and that was enough. He did not need to stand in the kitchen with the new appliances or look at the bedroom where they had planned to begin their life with his money and his blood on their hands. He knew what had been built there. He had always known how to read a structure by what it was designed to do. Yvette Marshall's disciplinary hearing before the State Board of Nursing took place on a Thursday in April. Walter did not attend. He did not submit a victim statement regarding her conduct because he had already said everything that needed saying in that hospital room, and he was not a man who repeated himself. The board had the full factual record. They had her signed statement, the bribe amount, the timeline of what she had agreed to, and what she had ultimately done. They weighed the cooperation against the conduct and arrived at the only conclusion the record supported. Her nursing license was revoked, permanently. She was not charged criminally. Her decision to call the crash team, 4 full seconds at that door, and then the right choice, and her complete voluntary cooperation were the reasons the DA had declined to prosecute. But the nursing board was not the DA's office, and the professional consequence was final and without appeal. She returned the $3,000 in full as part of the board settlement agreement. She found work eventually as a medical billing administrator at a clinic 2 counties over. Walter heard this through Philip and filed it without comment. He had given her the only thing he had to give. The choice, clearly stated, in that hospital room. What she had done with it was hers. The consequences of what came before the choice were hers too. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. 20 months later, Walter Price stood at a groundbreaking ceremony on a stretch of county road that had needed rebuilding for 11 years. Price and Sons Civil. Municipal infrastructure overhaul. Road resurfacing and full drainage reconstruction across 4 county districts. $4.7 million. His name on the site's signage in clean black lettering. His crew behind the orange barrier fencing with their hard hats and their shovels, and the specific settled confidence of people who have worked for someone who actually knows what he is doing. The county commissioner shook his hand for the photographer. Walter smiled. Not the practiced warmth he had performed at Sunday dinner, but the real kind, the kind that lives in the corners of a man's face and takes decades to earn. Celestine sat in the front row in a wide-brimmed church hat that required the people behind her to shift subtly to their left, which they did without complaint and without being asked. She watched the whole thing with the patient satisfaction of a woman who had been waiting a long time to sit in that specific chair on that specific morning, and had known, somewhere in the steady and unspectacular certainty she carried in her chest, that the morning would eventually come. Philip found him at the reception afterward, beside the refreshment table, holding a cup of coffee he had not yet drunk. He extended his hand. Walter took it. "You built it right," Philip said. Nothing else. It was enough. Walter drove home alone that evening. The new truck had 4,200 miles on it. He had spec'd every component himself, start to finish, and the brake system he had checked twice before he ever put the key in the ignition the first time. Not from fear, from precision. Because there are some things you do not leave to other people's hands twice. He took Route 9, the same road, the same long downhill grade in the dark. He drove it without slowing, without hesitation, because there was no reason not to, and arrived home with the porch light on because he had left it on. He pulled into the driveway and put the truck in park and sat for a moment. The neighborhood was quiet. The houses on either side had their lights going, the particular warm glow of Sunday evenings winding down, people inside moving through the ordinary rhythms of their lives. And Walter sat in the cab and looked at his house and held the quiet without trying to fill it. He thought about the ceiling, the specific quality of dark in that hospital room at 11:52 p.m., the kind of dark that only exists in institutional buildings at night, where the light from the hallway makes the shadows inside the room deeper by contrast. He thought about the door closing, the way the whisper carried in that silence, each word arriving cleanly, with the unhurried clarity of something spoken by a person who had rehearsed it many times and was no longer afraid of the words. Let him die, spoken plainly, without softening, by the woman who had sat across his table for 16 years, who had known every quiet thing about him, his schedule and his habits, and the road he drove home on, and the truck he drove it in, and had understood none of it, had taken all of that knowing, and looked at him and seen only what he could be used for, only what stood between her and somewhere else. She had seen a quiet man who built things and never raised his voice and gave his trust past the point of wisdom. She had seen something she could step over. She had not seen the foundation. He got out of the truck, walked up the front steps of the house that had always been his, through the door of the home she had waited in while she built another one with his money and her brother's hands. He went inside. He turned off the porch light. Tomorrow he had a job site at 6. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.